Hello, hello, and welcome to the PSL's What is Socialism webinar. We're very excited to have everyone who's joining right now. And we're about to play a video that's going to start shortly. So now is the time to invite all of your friends, your coworkers, your family. We have a lot of people who are interested in this webinar. So now is a great time to send a reminder out and say, join the webinar and let's talk about what is socialism. So for now, before we play the video, go ahead and comment in the chat what city you're joining us from. We're excited to see how many parts of the country this is reaching. All right. Welcome, everybody. Welcome, welcome. Look at all these parts of the country. New Jersey to Sacramento, Birmingham, Alabama. Too many to keep up with. But like I said, we're about to start the What is Socialism webinar, and there's going to be a video we're going to play shortly. So go ahead and tell your friends to join us and comment what city you're joining us from. And we'll go ahead and play the video.
If you want to join the struggle against Trump and Musk's billionaire agenda and join the fight for a more just society, you should sign up for the PSL Action Network today. Trump, Musk, and the entire billionaire class are attacking us from every direction. Public education, Social Security, Medicaid, civil rights, and more are all under fire. Meanwhile, the Democratic Party is providing no real resistance to Trump. Some are silent, others are actively collaborating with him on this billionaire agenda. What we do is decisive. Will we be demoralized and paralyzed? Will we follow the misleadership of the Democratic Party? Or will we chart a new path forward? Trump, Musk, the billionaire agenda are all products of a capitalist system that puts the wealth and the power of the billionaires above everything else. To defeat that, we need to build a powerful movement that reorganizes society around new priorities, meeting the needs of the people and the planet. The PSL Action Network is a tool to build up our socialist movement. As an Action Network member, you'll receive invitations to monthly webinars where we'll discuss important political updates and how you can talk about them effectively with the people in your lives. You'll also receive monthly packets containing literature, stickers, posters, materials that you can use to have these strong political conversations with your family, friends, coworkers, and neighbors. The socialist movement is growing, and you can help it grow more by joining the PSL Action Network today.
All right. Well, once again, I want to welcome every single person who is here. We're so glad to have you, and we're excited to jump into this webinar, which is a PSL Action Network webinar entitled, What is Socialism? We want to talk about this very pressing question that's on the minds of millions and millions of people across the US and across the world. And there's hundreds of people who have already gone and joined this webinar, so we're excited to jump in. It's a question that might have been on your mind for a few days, a few weeks, months, or years, but we believe it's an important discussion to have more and more all around the country. So my name is Cameron. I'm going to be your host tonight. I'm based in the Los Angeles branch of the PSL, and I've been an organizer for about 9 years now. Very excited to jump into this, and let's just go ahead and get started. We have some amazing speakers lined up, but just to introduce tonight's topic, for millions of people in the United States, for the vast majority, in fact, this system is not working. It's failing people all over. In an advanced capitalist country like the United States, the rule of the tiny minority is held up by a vast network of ideologies, myths, and propaganda to try to justify the unjustifiable. Despite the illusion of choice and all of the variety that's illustrated on cable TV, where we have 1,000 channels, internet media trying to push narratives from every country, every corner of the country, the message is very uniform. The system of capitalism, despite its problems, is supposed to be the best of all possible worlds. It's supposed to be the natural way things are set up, based on human nature. And they say that humanity is corrupt, whether by greed or original sin is how it's often placed. But also they say that exploitation is natural. There's no way to escape it. However, despite all of this mythology of capitalism being invincible, permanent, and something we just have to get used to, history has shown that capitalism cannot exist without resistance, protest, and rebellion. For the people who decide to stand up and say no more, the question is, why socialism? And the question is not just an academic question. And for us, it's the modern version of the question, which way forward? How can we change the world? And we're very happy, whether this is your first webinar or your 10th, your 20th, we're excited to have each and every one of you to join us for this important discussion about what socialism is, the history of socialism, and what a socialist revolution could look like in the United States. because the main thing that we talk to with all members, with the Action Network, and with our communities is how do we actually achieve it? Socialism is not just a dream, but it has to become a reality. And we believe it is entirely possible right here in the belly of the beast. So with that, I'm going to recommend that everyone take a look at their Zoom screen. There should be a Q&A function that should be visible. And you can go ahead, it should be at the bottom of the screen, and you can click Q&A. And if any of the presentations bring up questions for you about socialism, about the PSL, I want you to go ahead and put those in the Q&A function so that our panelists can respond to some of them after they both give their presentation. So very excited to get started today. I encourage you to take out a notepad. You're definitely going to hear some knowledge, and we want you to participate in the discussion. So be sure to use that Q&A function. And with that, with no further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our first speaker of the night, Satya, who's a nurse and a PSL organizer based in Atlanta. Please give a warm welcome to Satya.
Thank you, Cam, and hello, everyone. I'm very excited to speak to you all from Atlanta today. And I'm excited because we have 90 million people in this country who have a favorable view of socialism. And that's a sign that the capitalists are losing their ideological grip. Socialism is no longer on the fringe. It's a growing force, as seen in the wave of democratic socialist electoral wins lately. And these wins speak to the aspiration of tens of millions of people for a government that actually meets their needs and guarantees a life of dignity. But this is impossible under the capitalist system. What we in the PSL mean by socialism is that socialism is a system where the working class has political power, and it uses that power to plan the economy and meet the needs of the people and the planet, not profit. And in society today, there are two classes, the billionaire class and the working class. Under capitalism, the billionaire class is the ruling class. And this billionaire class is driven by the desire for more and more profits, no matter what the consequences are for the people and the planet. So how does the billionaire class control society? Through the private ownership of the means of production, distribution, logistics, and communications. So the machinery, technology, factories, raw materials, land used to produce goods and services. So the productive capacity of the country is owned by the billionaire class. This is how the billionaires maintain power. So, sorry, my AC is broken. So to end the rule of the billionaires, this productive capacity has to be socialized, nationalized, collectivized, and brought into the ownership and control of the workers themselves. So under socialism, the billionaire class will not exist. It would be a system that would have no mechanism in place to produce millionaires and billionaires, and the wealth hoarded by the billionaires would be expropriated and brought under public control. And the hoarding of wealth would become illegal. The working class becomes the ruling class under socialism. Workers, so that means service workers, factory workers, warehouse workers, tech workers, scientists, healthcare workers like myself, teachers, cultural workers, artists, homemakers, caregivers, and students, ordinary workers like us will hold the power to make the decisions that impact our life. And as socialists, we believe that it will take a revolutionary struggle to achieve socialism. The ruling class in the US benefits enormously from the capitalist system of exploitation and will not willingly give up its wealth or its power. Elon Musk just became a trillionaire. Meanwhile, 60% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck, and 1 in 4 people in this country live in poverty. Over 50 million people and children in this country face hunger on a daily basis. And the majority of the people face a cost of living crisis right now. But Elon Musk is not going to have an epiphany and redistribute that wealth out of the goodness of his heart. That's never going to happen. It will take an organized fight back by the working class, and that's why we are building the PSL. Socialists don't claim that a revolution in the US will solve all the social problems overnight. but it can immediately eliminate poverty and guarantee housing, healthcare, education, and childcare. It enables the full speed transition to green energy and lays the groundwork to fight racism, sexism, and bigotry. And we all know from our experience that capitalist democracy is a sham. Right now, what we're seeing in this country is the far right section of the billionaire class using the vessel of the Trump administration to attack the working class on all fronts. It aims to undo our civil and democratic rights that were won through mass struggle in the previous decades, in the 30s and the 40s, in the 60s and the 70s. And the right wing wants to end all environmental and labor regulations on corporations. They want to gut oversight agencies and dissolve social welfare programs like Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, because the billionaire class wants to privatize these programs. And why are they doing all of this? To squeeze more profits. And these policies of the Trump administration are very unpopular among the majority of people in this country, but they're using executive orders and the courts to carry out their agenda. And they use their police and intelligence agencies to repress opposition and resistance. The Supreme Court of 9 unelected judges, the Senate, and the Electoral College protect minority rule. They protect the rule of the billionaire class. Rights won can be undone. Political institutions under capitalism exist to prevent the genuine democratic participation of the majority. Both major parties are two wings of the same capitalist class. So the two-party system is an illusion of choice that is given to us. But a process of socialist reconstruction will revolutionize the form and function of government, making it truly democratic for the first time. We're talking about a workers' democracy. The government's purpose would no longer be the preservation of private property and the minority rule of the billionaires. The central functions of the socialist governments are, one, meeting the needs of the people and the planet, and two, reorganizing the economy to end exploitation in all of its forms. A foundational step in the socialist reconstruction of society would be the creation of a new constitution. The current U.S. Constitution was drafted by the U.S. slave-owning class, and it enshrines the rights of capital. But the new constitution would enshrine and expand the rights of the working class. And millions of people will participate in constitutional conventions or popular constituent assemblies to draft and adopt this new constitution, unleashing a creative and collective process, which is far more democratic and participatory than our current system. Those of us who were long denied a voice in the political system would shape the new constitution. And the U.S. Constitution leaves fundamental matters such as food, health, education, housing to the capitalist market, meaning in the hands of the billionaires, the Wall Street bankers, and the landlords. But these would be guaranteed rights in a socialist constitution. All the big corporations, the 500 biggest companies that produce 2/3 of this country's GDP, would be brought under people's control. They would be nationalized. The new socialist government will take possession of all the existing capitalist banks and create one people's development bank. In a socialist government, holding elected office of any legislative body would not be a full-time job. There would be no professional politicians. Government and civil servants will earn the salary of a skilled worker. And lifetime judicial appointments will be dissolved. The Electoral College would be abolished. The popular vote, one person, one vote, would be implemented. And mass organizations like unions, tenant organizations, cooperatives, youth groups will be empowered and be given legal recognition. So using centralism and a widening and grassroots democracy, people who have been neglected and left out will be brought into the decision-making process of the new government. More than 80% of the U.S. population lives in urban centers, but urban populations are widely underrepresented in federal and state bodies, and this would change. The House of Representatives could be replaced with the National People's Assembly that would not only be made up of delegates elected from local election districts, but would also include delegates from the many mass organizations of millions of workers, students, and more. And the Senate could be replaced by the Assembly of Oppressed Nations to correct the historic injustices imposed on the indigenous peoples and the Black nation. This Assembly of Oppressed Nations will consist of delegates from oppressed nationalities and peoples. And one of the biggest misconceptions about a socialist government is seeing it as a service provider and the people as passive recipients of services. This is false and wrong. The reorganization of society, including the transition of society to green technology and renewable energy, will be carried out by the people themselves. Mass organizations will have a central role in a socialist society. These voluntary-based organizations will be involved in the day-to-day management of the affairs of society. In that sense, the executive power of socialist society is in the hands of the people. We carry out the decisions that we make. Real democracy requires the full participation of the people in making and implementing the decisions. Capitalist democracy is limited to voting at the ballot box every 2 to 4 years for the next representative of the capitalist system. But socialism expands democracy to the participation of millions of workers, youth, all sectors in actually running society. And socialist revolutions over the last century took place in countries that had to overcome colonial underdevelopment, or societies that were in the early stages of capitalist development. But today, the US is an advanced capitalist economy. So the material conditions exist already in the US to transition immediately to socialism. Here in the US, we are starting from a position of abundance because capitalism creates a crisis of overproduction, not scarcity. And whatever shortages exist are actually a result of artificial scarcity, a manufactured scarcity that's driven by making profits and not meeting people's needs. And many of us remember the 2008 housing market crash, but the biggest banks and executives got bailed out. Meanwhile, 10 million families faced foreclosures. 4 million families lost their homes because too many homes and properties were built that could not be sold. And the Wall Street bankers got bailed out with trillions of taxpayer money. So the reorganization of housing under socialism has to do with the rational distribution of this abundance created by capitalism, but is being held hostage by the capitalist class. So under socialism, housing would be an inalienable human right and a social good. Homelessness would be eliminated in a very short period. And the core issue underlying all the problems is that housing is distributed for the purpose of accumulating profit under capitalism. And when we remove the profit motive out of the equation, we can create a national housing plan, create new agencies, and mobilize popular mass organizations of workers to develop comprehensive housing plans that will ensure the abolition of structural racism, eliminate segregation in housing, environmental racism, energy and water insufficiency, the lack of green spaces, and other pressing problems. And the popular demands for rent control, rent freezes, and low affordable rents would be a reality under socialism. Only a very small percentage of our wages would go towards rent. And healthcare would also be socialized. The healthcare industrial complex as we know it would be fully dismantled. Hospitals would be brought under public control. Healthcare would be completely free. Private insurance companies would be dissolved. And the pharmaceutical industry would be nationalized. Drug patents would be abolished. Medical debt would be immediately erased. prevention and public health would be prioritized. All healthcare workers would have the right to a union and help shape and carry out national, regional, and local initiatives related to health. Now, some in the socialist movement want to distance themselves from the efforts of the hundreds of millions of people in the world, in the global south, to construct socialism over the past century, since 1917, when the first successful socialist revolution took place. The projects that overthrew capitalism and began building a society in the interest of the working class. And these projects have faced the full brunt of US imperialism in the form of economic and financial blockades, sanctions, sabotage, assassination of leaders, undemocratic coups, funding and arming right-wing forces, occupations, and direct invasions. But we in the PSL uphold both the achievements and the lessons of those socialist projects and see our efforts here today in the US as a part of that historical project. It's easy to condemn, but they made revolution and reorganized society on a socialist basis and have taken on all of the challenges that come with the reorganization of the political and economic system. So if we are talking about socialist reconstruction, we have to consider the unique position of the US ruling class, which is not only exploiting and oppressing the people of this country, but it is the leading imperialist power that's oppressing the whole world. And the US empire maintains its domination of the world by bullying countries using international institutions that it controls, like the United Nations, the IMF, and the World Bank, and the brutality and violence of the US war machine and NATO. Some people in the socialist movement believe that incremental reforms can get us to socialism. They want to tweak the capitalist system to make it more humane, focus on the bread and butter issues of the working class here, but turn a blind eye to war and imperialism. But a government that spends over $1 trillion every single year on endless war against the peoples of the world and tens of billions to fund ICE and the police to wage a war on the poor and oppressed at home is not going to allow for structural reforms to meet and guarantee the needs of the majority of its people. So war is a fundamental feature of imperialism, which is the highest stage of capitalism. So the government of this country is an imperialist country, is an imperialist government. It has invaded over 80 countries since 1776, and it's the 250th anniversary of the United States. So that's 250 years of capitalist America. And what does that mean for the world? So that's 250 years of capitalist America killing 30 million people in the world using US sanctions alone. And this government has killed millions of people in the Philippines, in Korea, in Vietnam, in Chile, Iraq, Afghanistan, Yugoslavia, Somalia, Libya, Syria, Iran, and many more. It has funded the genocide and displacement of the Palestinian people since 1948. And the US capitalist class is the cause of the suffering of billions of people in the world. So socialist reconstruction of the United States would also mean the end of US imperialism. The socialist government would move to shut down the over 800 US military bases across the world. We would bring the troops home, and the US would be denuclearized. So a wave of revolutions would likely take place in the world if people win socialism here in the US. Socialist projects can actually advance beyond the first stage. So the relationship of the US with the whole world would change. It would not be based on competition, domination, and superiority, but rather on cooperation, friendship, and solidarity. We have to recognize that our freedom from capitalism here in the US is bound up with the struggle of the international working class against US imperialism. So socialist reconstruction is in the US is not only possible, but it's a historic responsibility to ourselves and the people of the world. Thank you so much.
Right. And thank you so much, Satya. Really appreciate your contributions. I think this is going to be an amazing discussion. And if you joined while Satya was talking, once again, we want to welcome you to this Action Network webinar where we are tackling the question, what is socialism? A question on the minds of millions and millions of people. Satya did a great job outlining that socialists have a plan, that we really need to get there, and it takes people power to get there. But that at the end of the day, we can have a type of system that actually works for the majority instead of the tiny few like it does in capitalism. So once again, if you have questions, go ahead and drop them in the Q&A section. We're going to do our best to tackle some of them. And next, I'm going to introduce our second speaker of the day, which is going to be Natalie. Natalie is a Central Committee member of the PSL and the Vice President of Substitutes with UESF, the United Educators of San Francisco. So give a warm welcome to Natalie.
Hi, everyone. It's so great to be with you this evening. I'm so excited to be talking about socialism at this particular moment in our history, and also in the labor movement itself. I'm here in Denver getting ready for the National Education Association Representative Assembly. I just, the point I really want to focus on tonight is that the United States has such a rich history of socialism, of socialist struggle, but almost none of us really know about it. We have to go back and we have to study it in order to relearn our history, because it's really been denied to us. And at this moment, when socialism is becoming so popular in a way, and growing in popularity, I think we really have an opportunity to resurrect our history, which is the history of working class struggle. It's the history of working people fighting for a society, like Satya defined, that serves the many, for a society where our class holds power in order to meet the needs of the people and the planet. And before some of the Cold War era assaults on communism and socialism that I will talk about a little bit more, in the United States itself, before that period, there were hundreds of daily and weekly socialist newspapers across the United States. At times between 1910 and 1916, open socialists controlled municipal governments in New York, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Dayton and Toledo, Ohio, Illinois, places in Montana, California, where people might think they still do, they don't, and many other cities. There was the state chapter of the Socialist Party. The largest state chapter was 100,000 members strong, and that was in Oklahoma. Eugene Debs, who was the Socialist Party candidate for president, was sentenced to prison for 10 years at hard labor at age 65. And that sentence was for giving a speech opposing the U.S. entrance into World War I. And he ran that campaign for president from his prison cell and still won nearly 1 million votes in 1920. I mean, there is this, very rich history that is so far removed from what we learn and hear about. Many of the people we hear about in popular culture, in our schools, and the people who are spoken to, I mean, even my kids, my kids who are in high school and elementary school learn about some of these names I'm about to say, because I think it's important to say their names, but they're identified as artists, intellectuals, leaders of social movements, but they themselves identified as socialists, they identified as communists, and that is almost never told as part of the history. Albert Einstein was a socialist. In May of 1949, he wrote a great article I think people should read called Why Socialism? Martin Luther King Jr. was a socialist, and his socialist ideas developed over time. He talked about being anti-capitalist. He talked about thinking about socialism and what it meant, and and he didn't just think, obviously, but organize. And when he was murdered, was assassinated, was organizing the Poor People's March, which was fighting for ideas that are considered socialistic in the United States, even though in some other places they're not even that radical. And if you really look into the history of folks like Martin Luther King Jr., You know, people like Martin Luther King Jr., like Malcolm X, they don't just sort of come out of the woodwork. Their families, their histories, you know, even their mothers. There's a great book about the mothers of James Baldwin, Martin Luther King, and Malcolm X called Three Mothers that points to how deeply political each of their mothers were and socialist. Frida Kahlo, Helen Keller, W.E.B. Du Bois, A. Philip Randolph, Charlie Chaplin, all of these people were socialists. Uh, Asada Shakur, Claudia Jones, Emma Tenayuka, socialists who played key and important roles in the movements of the United States and who are, you know, responsible for bringing forth and along with mass movements, winning some of the gains that we're fighting to defend right now. And there are so many others who are never named and sort of have been lost precisely because they were socialists. And then we can think about the people, but we have to think too about the role they played in critical struggles. Because as socialists, as revolutionaries, we are looking to build a mass movement for socialism. And what is important is that we're going to do that across a range of struggles. And socialists and communists played key leading roles in southern states opposing segregation, opposing lynching, and all manifestations of Jim Crow. The incredible labor struggles of the 1880s and 1890s were deeply influenced by socialist and by anarchist politics. Key leaders in those struggles and the movements that won the right to form labor unions, the right to desegregation in a wide range of facilities. Even back then, anti-racist struggles had in the leadership socialists and communists. And then later, during the Great Depression, it was communists who organized unemployed councils. The industrial unions, which was an incredible expansion of the labor movement beyond a narrow view and out into a much more widely representative swath of the society, and that were fundamentally anti-racist in so many ways. Those were organized by communists. Part of the fight for and winning of the Social Security Act in 1935 was a result of those struggles, the establishment of the right to unemployment insurance. The people and the struggles, the memory of socialism and its immense contribution to the fight here for social and economic rights has been almost extinguished. And this was done deliberately and on purpose. The capitalist class waged an all-out war on the ideas of socialism, starting in 1940 and a little bit before actually, but really with the Smith Act of 1940 and running through the 1950s. It was a deliberate campaign with the United States to repress the idea of socialism by repressing the people and the movements that struggled both for reforms and for socialism itself. The great irony of the myth of free speech, which, you know, I hear over and over and over again in discussions with other workers, with colleagues in the labor movement, you know, there's this myth people really hold on to and still believe of free speech in the United States. But that's layered on what was a decades-long assault to curtail free speech, to narrow the idea of speech to only those ideas acceptable to the tiny clique of uber wealthy individuals that have controlled the economy and the state. And this systematic effort of the capitalist class and the repression of the state expelled the socialist and communist left from US political discussion. Speech, any speech associated with socialism became too dangerous to exercise. And we can talk about so many examples that this all-out assault had for individuals across the labor movement in education, scientific institutions, government, really across society, where people lost jobs, they lost livelihoods and families. There were so many impacts. But one I wanted to talk about today is one that I've thought about previously. During the pandemic, I was as a teacher librarian, and we took on extra classes in Zoom school that were sort of different in a lot of ways. I mean, Zoom school was real rough, y'all. If anyone had to teach during that period, it was very tough. And one of the things we did was we watched Salt of the Earth. So this was seventh and eighth graders and myself, and together we watched this movie and we learned about the making of the movie. And if you look at, you can find one of the posters promoting the movie. It says, "At last, an honest movie about American working people, the salt of the earth." Um, and this movie is about working people. It is a feminist movie. It's a labor movement movie. It's you learn so much about organizing. It's an anti-racist movie, but none of it is dangerous. None of it should be considered, something that would have to be criminalized or removed from any, sort of society in which we think there is free speech. It's very evident of the effects of these attacks that were characteristic in all the attempts to suppress socialist and communist ideas. So the movie was made itself by a production company formed by directors and screenwriters who had been blacklisted for their politics and for refusing to denounce their politics in the face of these intense accusations. And that production company made one movie, and that movie was Salt of the Earth. And the International Union of Mine, Mill, and Smelter Workers helped fund it. And that union had been expelled from the Congress of Industrial Organizations, the CIO, in 1950 for itself resisting and refusing to fully purge communists. So the making of the movie itself is within the conditions of the assault on free speech that I'm describing. And the cast, because of the real problems, which there are many, many ways we could discuss this for a long time, but I'm sort of doing an overview. The cast only included 5 professional actors. Everyone else were residents of Grant County or mine workers. And in fact, one of the main characters, Ramon, is played by Juan Chacon, who was a real-life union local president at the time. And a journalist's account of the making of the movie, you can read, says, during the course of production in New Mexico in 1953, the trade press denounced it as a subversive plot. Anti-communist vigilantes fired rife shots at the set. The film's leading lady, Rosaura Revueltas, was deported to Mexico, and from time to time, a small airplane buzzed noisily overhead. The film, edited in secret, was stored for safekeeping in an anonymous wooden shack in Los Angeles. The outcome of the intensity of the repression on this one movie was that it was not widely viewed in the United States at all. It was pretty highly repressed, although it won awards outside of the country, and later experienced revitalization. But I think you can see that just from my description of this, the impact. And if you haven't seen the movie, I think you should see it. But if you have seen it, this kind of beautiful contribution to art and culture was completely sidelined just based on the consideration of socialist ideas as eminently dangerous. Well, they were dangerous, but they were dangerous really only to the capitalist class. They're such powerful ideas. But through this campaign of the capitalist class, the cancellation, or what we today, in cancel culture, we talk about cancellation of socialists and communists, became universally accepted and enforced across the U.S. capitalist establishment, and especially in the, quote, free press. And while those repressive campaigns of the 40s and 50s, and then, another wave of repression, the COINTELPRO suppression and repression of the movements of the late 1960s and 70s, that has effectively cut us off from such a rich history of social struggle in the United States. The ideas themselves are very, very hard to extinguish. When we come into conflict with the status quo, with the existing order, socialism can seem like such a natural conclusion. When we ask ourselves, why are there millions of poor people while billionaires and now trillionaires, well, one, but there will probably be more, unfortunately, unless we are successful. How do they amass more and more wealth? When we just think about healthcare, which, we just had to strike for 4 days to win fully covered healthcare in our little town of San Francisco, our little, local of 6,000 people, but 56% of American adults don't even have access to healthcare. When we start to ask these questions, when we stop accepting the mythology of capitalism and see it for what it is, its brutality and its exploitation, And when we experience that, either as workers ourselves, as women, as members of oppressed communities and nationalities, or when we witness them take place, as we did, as we could watch the genocide in Gaza, we start to ask these questions and look for answers. We start to act. And that action leads us to struggle and to considering alternatives to the brutal system we live in. And socialism is that alternative. Socialist ideas have been gaining in popularity for the last few decades precisely because of our collective experience of the brutality of capitalism, because of a rejection of the status quo and an interest, a revitalized interest in ideas that were never completely suppressed. My own experience in joining the movement, and I became very, very active at a time when socialism wasn't a word you could say. Even, in the anti-globalization and then anti-war movements of the early 2000s, the movement of the early 2000s, even being against imperialism, being for Palestine was harder to say. We said it, but the response considered it a fringe idea. Socialism wasn't talked about. It has turned from a dirty word to a popular slogan and a winning platform in a couple of decades. And that is because of the struggle in the streets. It's because periodic struggles from the Occupy movement through the rebellions against racism have fundamentally changed people's consciousness in the United States and have offered an avenue to consider alternatives to the brutality of our experience of the status quo. And I think the movement for Palestine and the understanding of how the occupation of Palestine now plays a material factor in today's society and even in the elections today is critically important to think about this, because it's very exciting to see open socialists, democratic socialists win and win so much in the primaries very recently of the midterm elections. And if you look at, and I think, I think I've seen in the questions and others, there are differences between democratic socialism and revolutionary socialism. And we should be honest and understand those and think them through. But also it is exciting to see the expansion of socialism as a popular word, socialism as an idea that can be built upon and struggled for and win. Because if you look at what is common across, and all of these individuals who are winning are different. They come from different places, have different histories, but there are some commonalities that I've noticed as I've read more and more and paid more and more attention. One of them is, the need for healthcare, which is drastic in the United States, and a more generalized agenda against the billionaires, against the exploitation that leads to, and the contradictions that lead to people having billions and billions of dollars while millions of people sleep on the streets, while millions of people have no access to healthcare. And then central to these wins has been Palestine. The question of Palestine is now a question in the US electoral system, but for decades and decades and decades, it has been the one thing the two capitalist parties agree on denying. Their support for Israel was one of their few concrete similarities. And that has been broken up by the movement itself. And that contributes itself to an expansion and understanding of socialist ideas, because socialism, in our struggle for socialism, we must be anti-imperialist. And Palestine has been at the crux of the anti-imperialist struggle. And I don't have much more time, so I just want to end on a few more points. I think as socialism experiences an exciting expansion of its popularity, and as we think about what we're fighting for, it's very, very, very important for us to think about how we will win socialism. Because we are fighting for a vision of a different society, armed with an analysis of the current one, of the capitalist system, with its contradictions, its inherent exploitation and oppression. And we have a collective commitment to replacing it. We cannot be satisfied with a reform status quo. It will require a massive movement for socialism and the adoption of socialist ideas across the country to win a new system. which is why the popularity and increasing is so exciting. But our rich history of struggle also shows that the capitalist system itself will adapt and adopt new methods to survive, and will never concede to fully not be exploitative or oppressive. A revolution is necessary. It is necessary to replace capitalism with a socialist society. And we must build the movements that are necessary in order to do that. And I think those of us who are socialists have an important role to play, like we did in history, in how in all of the different places that we're in all of our workplaces and our neighborhoods, our schools, wherever we are, that we can contribute to the expansion of the struggle and that we can play a role. We can do so from the idea of that even within the most reformist frameworks. I'm in the labor movement where our contracts are just pure representations of winning a compromise. You can never win everything you need through one contract struggle. But I'll talk about the labor movement for a second to make this point, is that the labor movement right now has been in a decline, but it does represent tens of millions of workers. And we need a revitalization of that movement. We need an expansion of the representation of unions, of the organizing in the working class movement that has won so much. But that revitalization is not going to be possible without those of us intervening from the view that we will fight to win the union, but we have to fight beyond that. We need to fight for the kind of vision that we are motivated for, even through that struggle for the union, for fully paid healthcare, for education, for a job is a right. All of these things that, I think I'm not going to go much more into, but those are the basic platforms of reforms that can be won under capitalism, but given the way the United States is, will not be possible without socialism. And I think Satya did a great job of laying out what that could look like. And armed with that vision, we must continue to build the movement. And I'm very excited to be with you all today to discuss socialism and how to do that.
Thank you so much, Natalie. Really appreciate your contributions and how you were able to tie together, the history of the U.S. fight back movement, including the labor movement, and connect it to our struggle for socialism, because those victories show us that the final victory of socialism is entirely possible in our lifetimes as well. I dropped one more time in the chat because someone dropped it before, the article about lessons from the 2026 UESF educator strike. So that article is written by Natalie, our previous speaker. Highly encourage you to check that out and connect everything together, because these struggles are deeply connected themselves. So while we bring our panelists back up for the Q&A, which I hope everyone sticks around for, it's going to be super exciting. I do just want to mention to everyone that you can join the PSL Action Network today by going to pslweb.org/action. And with that, you can make your contribution to building this organization and at the same time receive all sorts of materials shipped directly to you, as well as invitations to all of these webinars so you'll never miss one. But I want to make sure that every single person on this is aware that you can join the Action Network and be a part of the socialist movement today. So we're going to share those links again, and we highly encourage you to go ahead and check it out. So if we could have our panelists come back on camera and come back on, we'll go ahead and start the Q&A now. Very excited to jump into it. And yeah, we heard from them, what does a socialist outlook look like? What can socialist reconstruction of society look like? And what is the history of socialism here in the US? And how can we continue to fight for it? So we heard a lot of really amazing examples. There's so many questions that were in the chat. We would be here for 24 hours if we tried to answer every single one of them. But like we always say, the answers are really in the streets. We encourage you to get involved in your community and build with the branch closest to you. And that is how we really build the answers, is together. But we're going to go ahead and jump into a couple of those questions while time permits. So I'm going to start with one, and it'll be open to either of our panelists, either one or both. But the first one, this was a common question. I saw different forms of it, but the first question is, can socialism and democracy coexist? What is the difference between revolutionary socialism that the PSL supports and what is frequently called democratic socialism? So I think we started to touch on these questions, but I want to hear from our panelists. What are your thoughts?
Hey everybody. Yeah, I can definitely start. Um, I think the biggest lie that we've been fed is that socialism is an undemocratic system. But in my opinion, socialism is actually the expansion of democracy in a very permanent way. And I would actually argue that socialism is a superior form of democracy in comparison to the democracy that exists under the capitalist system. And the main reason for this, and I articulated this in my talk, which is that there is no billionaire class under socialism. And their political representatives are not in power. It's actually the working class itself that becomes the ruling class. We are the ones that hold power in society. So that means that decision making and policy is not just a top-down process. It's actually a very dynamic process. It's an exchange from the top to the bottom and the bottom to the top. And it involves debate and discussion, at the neighborhood level, and which is then actually shaping policy at the national level and vice versa. And the other thing I had mentioned in my talk was that, I said that the new constitution enshrines the workers' right to a union and our right to actually organize ourselves into mass organizations. So we're talking about a system that actually wants workers to be organized. It wants people to be organized. And we use those vehicles of mass organizations to expand democracy, under a socialist system. And then I also would like to touch on the other part of that question, about what is the difference between revolutionary socialism that the PSL supports, and what's frequently called democratic socialism. I touched on this a little bit in my presentation, but fundamentally, we in the PSL, we believe that a revolutionary struggle and a revolution is necessary in order to win socialism in this country. So when we say a revolution, what does that actually mean? So revolution is a process that's smashing the old state and it's creating a new state. And, in the history of the US, there was the first Reconstruction, happened after the Civil War, which was actually a social revolution because it transformed property relations inside the US. It ended slavery. And then comes the second Reconstruction, which is the Civil Rights era, which was a political revolution because it tore down the structures of apartheid, but the economic system still remains in place. So we have an unfinished revolutionary process in this country. And so there is a need for a third Reconstruction, which we are arguing has to be a socialist Reconstruction, which will actually have to change property relations and the economic foundations from capitalism to a socialist foundation. And this phenomena of the success of democratic socialists in elections inside the US, obviously Mamdani won the election in New York City, which energized actually millions of people all across the US and the world. And I think to the extent that it advances the overall movement for socialism, it's helping popularize the concept of socialism, but also showing the limits of trying to reform the system from within. It is actually a net positive for the socialist movement. But it is also not the first time in the history of this country or in the history of the world communist movement for democratic socialists, really social democrats, it's the tendency of social democracy within the broader socialist movement, to be elected into office. So we should actually study these instances in history and understand, I think, the limitations of this approach. Because the capitalist system actually remains to this day in all of these countries, and they did not make revolution. They haven't transformed the fundamental kind of the economic foundation of their countries. And the capitalist system will not allow them to incrementally take over the system and develop socialism within the shell of capitalism. So if we want socialist reconstruction, if we want to actually tackle these problems at the very root, that actually requires ending the rule of the billionaires, which will take a revolution. I'll let Natalie go and then I can answer some more.
I don't have a ton to add. I really support Satya's answer. I think the only thing I would say is that in differentiating democratic socialism from revolutionary socialism, which Satya has done, there is also, I think it's very important for us to recognize the possibility and necessity, so the actuality of having a revolution in the United States. And I think that it is, it can be very, very hard for us when we're living in a society that is, so deeply challenged in so many ways. There's so many contradictions, millions and millions of workers voting for someone like Trump, who is, a wealthy Nepo baby. I mean, like who has appealed to sort of the most basis and disgusting racism and sexism in our society in order to win over a section of workers to vote against their interests. I think it can be hard to sort of see through that and think, well, will we ever be able to have a revolution in the United States? And I do think revolutionary socialists, our answer is yes. And that is a differentiation. We participate in all areas of the class struggle, all arenas, from the elections to our unions and the labor movement, where we don't have unions and we're organizing workers, to the movements on the ground that arise for immigrant rights, against police brutality, against imperialist war. All of this, we go in all of these different areas because all of them are facets of the class struggle. But ultimately, we need to overcome oppression and exploitation, and that does require a revolution, and a revolution is possible, even when it's hard to see that it is. So I think that's the only kind of piece I would add myself to what Satya has very eloquently said.
Yeah, amazing. Eloquent answers from both of you, and very important to highlight that fact that socialism is possible, revolution is possible, and that we have to fight every single day in all of these fronts of struggle in order to do that. And that's why we invite each and every one of you to be a part of this movement, to join the socialist movement, whether it's through the Action Network, applying to join the PSL, or both, right? So these are all on the table. And we want to bring together the people who really believe that this society can change, because all of us feel that the system is failing, and that's part of why we're here. But we want to be a part of actually changing it. Also very important to mention that I think it was touched on a little bit, but even participating in elections is one of the tactics of the PSL. And it's for this goal that Satya brought up too, of actually raising that socialist consciousness, making it clear to people that actually we don't have to hide our politics and pretend that we're just Democrats in order to advance this socialist cause. But we can actually put it all on the table and say, actually, you should have workers running at every level of government, running this system, instead of having to be outside of the system while the corporate politicians actually make the decisions. So we are all about abolishing that dollar democracy. We're about getting rid of dollar democracy and actually replacing it with workers' democracy, which is significantly more democratic than anything any of us have gotten to experience in the United States. Now, with that said, we are approaching the hour mark, but there's one more very important question that I want both of our speakers to hopefully be able to contribute to. How did you join the socialist movement, and why is it important to go from just holding socialist belief to actually practicing the struggle for socialism? Whoever wants to go first, I'll pass it.
You want me to go, Satya? All right. So I got involved quite a long time ago, before socialism was still a dirty word. But I incidentally ended up, and I don't need, no one needs to know all the details, but at the Battle of Seattle in 1999, I had not really been involved, and it was my first protest, and it actually was a battle. King County ran out of rubber bullets and tear gas in one day, protecting imperialist entities, the IMF and World Bank. And I really sort of had a lot of political thoughts and thought about a lot of things, but seeing people in action and fighting exploitation that way sort of forced me to look into it a lot more. And so I would say that was the beginning of sort of becoming political, but I didn't really adopt the ideas of socialism or start to call myself a communist or socialist until many years later. And it was through the anti-war movement when September 11th of 2001 happened, and there was, mass racism, a campaign against people of color of all types, but particularly Muslims and Arabs in 2001, and then the wars began immediately. And that anti-war movement really trained, I think, a generation of us in organizing and in the struggle. So I would say that's where I came from. And just to kind of move to the second piece of the question, I have been active in my union since I became an educator in 2007. I think, I do now serve as an officer of our union and consider myself to be part of a labor movement that has been doing a lot of great work and also needs to do a lot more. And I think that it's on us as socialists and as communists, as revolutionaries, to be deeply involved in what, workers organizing in the workplace. And for us as educators, we're not at the point of production, but we have a political role to play right now in the struggle for democracy, the struggle to defend public education, and to, I think, be part and parcel of those struggles as we seek to build a consciousness that goes beyond the consciousness of the union, the consciousness of our class, in rightly understanding who the bosses are and how they operate in society, but towards socialist consciousness. And I think that's a very important task right now, is really understanding what we're fighting for as we win the struggles that materially improve the lives of the workers that, our co-workers. And we do it together. In our union, we do it collectively. Our bargaining team is 120 people. And the strike was a supermajority strike. We had, everyone in the streets, and the community was in the streets with us. And okay, I just got to tell this one little story. But, the community support was so deep because the community supported what we were fighting for. And the mayor called the parents who are, not just random parents, but they called homeless moms who are organizing. They called parents who are advocating for special education and asked them to break with our strike, to turn against us. And each one of them said, no, if you agree with the teachers' demands, the educators' demands, then the strike will be over. And I just think that kind of organizing and building power together is a necessary step to building in a larger way as well. We have to do both and all of it. So I don't know if I fully answered the question, but that's what I think.
I think you did an excellent job answering that question. Really good to hear your story. And why don't we go to Satya? How about you?
Thank you, comrade. I think I'll try to keep it on the shorter side, but how I got involved in the socialist movement. Well, before I was a socialist, I actually became an organizer when I was in college. It all started with getting involved in a union campaign at my university, where we as students were also involved in a campaign to help build a union for the cafeteria workers at my school. And that experience really transformed me because it showed me that when people come together, get organized, and fight towards a common goal, that it can actually be achieved, because we won the union. But I continued to organize within the labor movement for a few years. And I also saw the limitations of, essentially what Natalie was kind of speaking to, the limitations of, limitations of fighting for reforms within the capitalist system when there's so much abundance and this, crisis of overproduction, but people's needs are being unmet. There should be no reason that a single person in this country should be going hungry or should be living in poverty when there's so much wealth in this country. But it's all concentrated at the top, and that I could never come to terms with that. And I always actually joke around that if I had met the PSL when I was 12 years old or 13 years old, I probably would have joined or would have wanted to join. But the thing that actually got me to join the PSL, this was in 2017, was the PSL's position on the US war on Syria. And the PSL's position was actually a minority opinion within the anti-war movement inside the US at the time. It was an extremely unpopular position because there was so much propaganda in the media about why why US intervention in Syria is actually beneficial for the Syrian people. But the PSL stood its ground, and that like staunchly anti-imperialist position convinced me that this was the organization that I wanted to be with, even though the PSL was actually getting attacked by other organizations in the left, by other liberal organizations for its anti-war position, and it did not compromise. It did not concede, and that made a mark on me. And the reason that I'm a socialist, or that I'm in a socialist organization organizing, I'll put it very simply. I mean, I think at the end of the day, I feel that I should put my principles and my values into action. And I don't think, especially being a nurse and seeing, every day at the hospital, the unnecessary suffering that people have to go through, not having access to healthcare, not being able to afford healthcare. Again, in a society where there's so much wealth, that's just unacceptable to me, and I felt like I had to take action.
That is such an amazing answer to both of you. And I think everyone got to hear two examples of how people turned their political beliefs and their desire for justice into action. And that is exactly what we're fighting for here in the PSL and the PSL Action Network, is that it's all about taking action to actually make this sort of society happen. So you heard it earlier, we participate in everything from the labor movement to the immigrant rights movement, to the struggle against police brutality and racism, to the struggle for LGBTQ liberation, in the sense that Pride just ended, but our Pride continues every single day. And all across the country, you see the PSL active in all of these struggles, the anti-war movement and beyond. So this is what it takes to build a sort of robust socialist movement that connects all of these struggles to each other and brings people together. So with that, folks, I want to thank our two speakers. Really excellent. And, they are committed organizers in the cities that they're part of. But we believe that any person can transform themselves to be able to represent and push forward the socialist movement. So once again, thank you to our presenters for that powerful discussion. If you liked what you heard, first put it in the chat and, really express that, because this is the type of movement that it's going to take. And the socialist vision that these wonderful candidates proposed is something that you can hear in a lot of different places. So I want to invite all of you to join us on a very special occasion, which is going to be the upcoming People's Forum Summer School for Socialism course, and to join the PSL Action Network. So let me tell you a little bit about these two things. So this summer, the People's Forum is going to take a deep dive into socialist history, theory, and key concepts in what's called All Power to the People, a Summer School for Socialism. Together, we'll explore socialism's proposals and the potential for a real revolution in the United States that could lift the burden of war and oppression from the people of the world. More than just being a class, the program is a call to action. How do we understand the current context? How do we define our vision of the future? And how do we organize to build it? So if you join this link, which we're going to drop in the chat, you can join us for 5 weeks of classroom sessions, discussion, revolutionary study, and we'll really be putting theory into practice alongside new friends and comrades. It's open to everyone everywhere, whether you're new to organizing or you've been organizing for years. We encourage you to bring your family, your friends, your coworkers, anyone who is interested in making this society better. This year, PSL Action Network members are going to have access to an exclusive virtual cohort for PSL Action Network members. And this is going to be for that summer school course for socialism. And it's really exciting to have so many people who are on today who want to get involved. And I want to encourage you that the Action Network is the first best step to contribute to the socialist movement right away. Action Network members receive political materials in the mail like flyers, posters, and stickers to share with family, friends, and coworkers, anybody in your circle, so you can bring socialism and this movement to everyone you know. You can bring them into the fight as well. You'll be invited to monthly webinars like this one and events. And the only requirement to join the PSL Action Network is to make a monthly donation, which covers printing and shipping costs and also helps to expand our work to grow the socialist movement. This summer, Action Network members from across the country will meet once per week throughout the People's Forum course in order to discuss those class materials. And you'll get to meet PSL members and fellow socialists from across the country, discuss those course materials, share your takeaways, and strategize for how we can build the socialist movement right here in the US. So we're going to drop a bunch of links in the chat, and we're also going to drop some links to further study about socialism and its history in the United States, because we can never get enough of that, right? So with that, folks, we're going to go ahead and close out the webinar for today. We encourage you to stay on the lookout for the next webinar that's going to take place. And I want to thank each and every one of you joining. We'll see you in the streets and in the struggle. Have a great night, everyone.